Time doesn't merely halt in the heat of battle, it fractures. What seems an eternity may be a single, bloody hour. This is the raw reality of command, where every choice is weighed in blood and breath, and the boundary between victory and ruin is defined by the bravery of men defending a stone wall. We are taken to the smoke-filled crest of Cemetery Ridge on July 3, 1863, to stand alongside a Union general as he observes the final act of the Battle of Gettysburg, the notorious Pickett's charge. Through his perspective, we encounter not the clean geometry of a map, but the thunderous noise, the suffocating dust, and the immense burden of leadership confronting a legendary infantry charge. This is the tale of the few who faced the many, a decisive historical instant captured in a first-hand narrative of unmatched intensity. It very well could have been an age. In reality, it may have been 1 hour, or possibly 3, or even 5. The tracking of time in such a circumstance, no matter how precise by the clock, becomes deeply untrustworthy for those who are living through it. Growing tired of watching men and horses being ripped apart and observing that while some shells hit and detonated among us, most flew overhead and burst behind our position, it occurred to me that a spot further forward might be safer. Getting to my feet, I advanced, accompanied by my aide, Lieutenant Haskell. I had moved only a few paces when 3 of Cushing's limber chests blew up at once, throwing their contents in a great pillar of dense smoke high into the sky. And above the chaos, the enemy's victorious cheers could be heard as they saw the result of their bombardment. Moving past the clump of trees noted as marking this part of our line, we continued to the fence where the soldiers were lying prone behind it. Motioning for them to part, I stepped over the wall, walked to a small patch of bushes located directly in front of the line, and gazed out from there to see if I could detect any movement happening in that direction. Nothing could be seen except the smoke constantly pouring from the long row of batteries, and nothing could be heard but the unending roar of hundreds of cannons, the screaming of countless projectiles as they ripped through the air in every direction, and the explosion of shells. These all traveled above our heads and usually detonated behind us. While standing there and considering how this entire tumult would end, Mitchell, an aide to General Hancock, approached me with a message from Hancock, wanting to know what I thought was the intention of this tremendous fire. I replied that I believed it was the prelude either to a retreat or to an assault. After staying there for a while and noticing that the enemy did not lower the elevation of their guns, we walked toward the left, still outside the battle line, the men watching us with interest from behind the stone wall as we passed. As we neared the left of my division, the line bent slightly forward, beyond which lay the spring mentioned in the description of the terrain. As we approached the marshy ground below it, I directed Lieutenant Haskell's attention to a soldier who had obviously left his regiment ahead to get water. Several canteens were hung around his neck, and he was crawling back through the damp soil, staying as low to the ground as possible, clearly fearful of the shot and shells shrieking over his head. As we got nearer, I called out to him, "Take care, my man. You could be hit." At the sound of my voice, he turned his head, still pressing himself to the ground as tightly as he could, to look toward me, and then, as if struck by a sudden idea, got to his feet and walked with determination back to his regiment, no doubt thinking to himself that if 2 officers could stand upright, there was little danger for a third. Circling around to the left of my line, I was moving behind it, back toward the right, when I noticed a soldier crossing the field carrying another, clearly wounded, upon his back. Just as they drew level with us, they reached a low stone wall, which one was trying to climb while still carrying the other. I stopped and told Haskell to go and help them, and we then continued on our way. The fire from both sides had by now greatly lessened, and only an occasional shell was coming from the enemy's artillery. As we proceeded toward the right, a staff officer, accompanied by an orderly who was leading my horse, met me with the news that the enemy was advancing in great strength. I quickly mounted and rode to the crest of the hill, where a magnificent yet terrible spectacle met my eyes. The enemy, in a long gray line, was marching directly toward us, across the rolling ground in our front, their flags fluttering in the air and serving as guides for their battle line. Ahead of them was a thick skirmish line which was pushing ours back at a run. Behind this leading line, another became visible, and finally a third, and the whole mass advanced like immense waves of humanity, steadily and relentlessly. Quickly telling Haskell to ride to General Meade and inform him the enemy was assaulting us in force, and that we would need all the support he could send, I ordered the guns of Arnold's battery to be run up to the wall and loaded with double charges of canister, and then rode down my line, warning the men to hold their fire until the first enemy line had crossed the Emmetsburg road. By this time, bullets were whistling quite thickly along the line, and batteries from other parts of the field had begun firing upon the moving multitude before us. The front enemy line reached the Emmetsburg road, and hurriedly scrambling over the two fences, paused briefly to reform, and then started up the slope. My division had until this moment fired very little, but now from the low stone wall on each side of the angle, every rifle along its length unleashed a most tremendous fire. From my post on the left, I could witness the dreadful aftermath. The mounted officers in the rear were seen to fall before it, and as the following lines advanced and scrambled over the fences, men dropped from the top rails, yet the mass continued to press on right up to our very guns in the stone wall ahead. I observed after all three lines had merged that the men on the right of the attacking force were constantly shifting inward to their left, clearly to fill gaps created by our fire, and that the right of their line was faltering behind the thicket where I had stood during the cannonade. To our left of this position was a regiment from the division, and eager to assist in the fierce struggle now taking place on the hill to the right, I tried to get this regiment to swing out to the front by a changed front forward on the right company, to strike the enemy's line in the flank and sweep up along the front of our position. But in the din and confusion of the battle, it was difficult to make my commands understood. Few who are unfamiliar with the rigid demands of discipline and of how an effective military organization must be a mechanism that functions at the will of one commander as completely as a locomotive responds to the will of its engineer, not in all matters, but in every function. The locomotive was built to obey, can understand the critical importance of drill and discipline in a crisis such as the one we now faced. In my urgency to get the regiment to swing out and execute my plan, I spurred my horse in front of it and signaled the left flank to advance. I was abruptly reminded of the foolish position I had taken when the entire regiment opened fire. I moved to the rear as quickly as possible, looking to my left to see if I could locate troops there who might be persuaded to carry out my orders. I saw a unit lying behind a small breastwork I had personally ordered to be built the previous day, and driving my spurs into my horse, I rode toward it. Just before I reached the position, to my astonishment, the men began a retreat to the rear, even though there was no fire of any consequence on their front. With some difficulty, I persuaded the command to return to their breastwork, directed the attention of the officers and men to the great numbers falling back from the assaulting column, which were clearly visible, and then convinced I could gain no advantage from that command, I galloped back to my own division and again tried to get its left to swing out. While thus engaged, I felt a sharp blow seemingly behind my left shoulder. I soon began to grow faint from the loss of blood, which was dripping from my left hand. I instructed my aide to turn over command of the division to General Harrow, and accompanied by another staff officer, Captain Francis Wessels of the 106th Pennsylvania. I left the field, the sounds of the combat on the hill still echoing in my ears. So what do you think? Was it sheer tactical brilliance, or the unyielding resolve of the men behind that stone wall that finally decided the outcome? General Gibbon's account compels us to face the brutal chaos of history, where victory balanced on a handful of instants and the courage of individuals lost to time. But this is only one viewpoint. We want to hear yours. Did the Confederacy's high command make a disastrous mistake, or did it come down to mere inches in luck? Could the Union line have actually been breached? Debate your theories in the comments below. We'll be reading every single one. If this glimpse into history left you eager for more, like and subscribe.